Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to dig into a really provocative theory about Donald Trump's presidency. It's this idea that what looks like pure chaos might actually be a master plan. And it all boils down to one simple question.
All right, so let's just jump right in. The theory we're looking at today, it really flips the common narrative on its head. It asks us to seriously consider this. Is all that chaotic behavior we see just a sign of incompetence? Or could it be something else entirely? A deliberate, maybe even brilliant strategy?
I mean, on the surface, right? A lot of his actions just seem, destructive. Not just for global stability, but for America's own interests. To a lot of people watching, it just looks like one big mistake after another. Think about it. He's picking fights with allies we've had for decades, threatening these wars that look totally unwinnable, and you've got major banks like JP Morgan saying he's pushing the whole global economy to the edge of a cliff. I mean, to a lot of folks, it looks like he's just clowning around while the world burns. But, and this is where the theory gets really interesting, what if this is all part of the plan? What if the chaos isn't a mistake? What if it's the whole point of this strategy? What if the real goal is something we're not even seeing? Okay, so this line of thinking suggests that maybe Trump isn't even trying to win in the way we normally think about it. The theory goes that his actions are intentionally designed to push away allies, to basically orchestrate a retreat from that global order that's been in place since World War II, the so-called American empire. So here's the core idea, right? If your actual goal is to tear down the old system, then all those moves that look completely self-destructive, well, suddenly they start to look like the most effective tools you could possibly use. All right, let's get into the first big piece of this puzzle. It's all about global resources, specifically how oil plays an absolutely critical role in this whole alleged grand strategy. Okay, take a look at this. It really highlights a massive vulnerability on the world stage. You've got these major economies, and we're talking about competitors and allies here. They are all incredibly dependent on oil from the Middle East. I mean, Japan gets 75% of its oil from there. India, 60%. China, 50%. That is a huge potential choke point. But here's the twist. The common perception is that oil is the super rare thing. But it's not, really. It's just concentrated in certain places. And get this, the world's largest oil reserves, they're not in the Middle East. They're in Venezuela. And guess who else has massive, easy-to-get-to reserves? Yup, Canada and the United States. North America is basically an energy powerhouse. So if you follow this theory, the plan is actually pretty simple. You start a conflict in Iran, something that shuts down the Strait of Hormuz. Boom, Middle East oil exports just stop. And all of a sudden, where did Japan, China, India, and Europe have to get their energy? They have no choice. They have to come to North America. And it isn't just oil, by the way. It's also key stuff for fertilizer that comes from the region. Okay, so now let's connect this whole resource control idea to what a lot of people think is America's biggest weakness. It's massive national debt. Because in this theory, that weakness gets turned into an incredibly powerful weapon. For decades, the single biggest fear in American economics has been this. What if the countries that finance our debt, the ones buying all our bonds, what if they just stop? If they did, the entire U.S. financial system, which some critics have called a giant Ponzi scheme, could just collapse, like overnight. Now check this out, because this is where it gets really interesting. Look at the overlap here. Who owns the most U.S. debt? Japan, China, South Korea, Taiwan, the UK. Notice a pattern? These are the exact same countries that are totally dependent on that oil from the Middle East. You see where this is going? And that's the trap. The theory says that by controlling their energy supply, Trump basically flips America's biggest weakness into its biggest weapon. All those countries that hold our debt, they can't threaten to dump the dollar anymore because they need that dollar to buy American energy just to keep their countries running. They're completely locked in. So the idea here isn't just about economic power, it's about building a totally self-sufficient fortress America. And the theory points out that there's even a playbook for this. It's kind of what Russia did, using conflict to pivot its own economy toward resource dominance, getting ready for a world that's a lot more fractured. And when you start looking at it through this lens, all these moves that seemed kind of random before, they suddenly look like calculated steps. The weird talk about Greenland, that's about rare earth minerals. The focus on Venezuela, that's about oil. Pressuring Canada and Mexico, resources and manufacturing.
It all starts to look like pieces of a puzzle, building that self-sufficient North American fortress.
So, the end game here, according to the theory, isn't about global leadership, not in the old sense anyway. It's a strategic retreat. It's about shutting down the whole American empire project, pulling back and building a new foundation, one based on total resource dominance, and then just letting the rest of the world figure things out on its own.
Which brings us right back to that wild central paradox, doesn't it? The very things that make him look like a total failure to the rest of the world are, if you believe this theory, the exact signs that he's succeeding. Losing is actually winning, and chaos is actually control.
And that leaves us with one last, really provocative thought from the source material. It makes you ask yourself, are we just completely misreading the actions of a fool, or are we watching the birth of a totally new and maybe much more ruthless global power structure, and we just don't even recognize it yet? What do you think?